Ang programa ng Special Opinion Balita at iba pa ay tumatalakay sa mga isu pang kasalukuyan at napapanahon. Mapapolitika, mapaopinyon, mapakomentaryo at balita, ang programa ito ay patas sa lahat. Walang kinikilingan, walang kinakampihan, at walang pinapanigan ang programa ito. Ang programa ito ay public service sa kahanginan at trabaho lamang.
Mahigit isang dekada ng programa Halo-Halo Special Premium Balita at iba pa ugay sa kanyang sariling tahanan, ADLSN TV News Online Corporation. Ako po ay bumabati sa lahat ugay sa ika-13 foundation anibersaryo ng programa ito magmula ngayon, October 16, 2024 at patuloy pa sa patas na pagbabalita at serbisyo publiko para sa bayan. Ayan.
Female voice, male voice, lolly voice, monster voice.
Okay, kahit masama ang pakiramdam natin, ay tuloy po ang programa, no? Actually, ay parang hindi ko kaya po magtayo rito, no? Pero, okay, trabaho ito mga kababayan, no? Okay, tinamaan ako ng flu. Okay, mula ng Huwebes, no? Ng gabi. Okay, hindi ako naka-program. Hindi man kompleto po ay naka-recover po yung inyong bata-bata sa kahanginan. Pero ganun lang, trabaho talaga. Okay, ang time check natin 52 minutos, pasado po ng alas 6 na. Okay. 18 po ng October 2024. Umaga po ng Friday ang programa natin, no? So, kahit isang oras lang, pilitin natin matapos ang programa. Okay, kahit sakit po ang buong katawan natin, mga kababayan, no? Okay, ganun talaga pag matanda na. Marami po dumadapo. Okay, sakit sa atin, mga kababayan, no? Kaya nga, kailangan triple ingat pag mga ganitong edad na. Okay, marami talaga atake po ng mga klaseng sakit, no? Okay, dito tayo sa consolidated news natin sa umagang ito. Tuloy-tuloy pa rin ng programa pang anibersaryo natin. Okay, sa consolidated news. Ito sa platform po ng ADLSN TV News Online, no? Okay, ADLSN TV News Online Corporation. Okay, sa kanyang 13 taon na programa, Halo-Halo Special Opinion Balita at iba pa, no? Okay, kasama po sa Bisyo Publiko Tinig ng Mamamayan, sa kaugnayan sa mamamayan. Ayan po. And then, pag-aruga sa mamamayan mga suki, no? Ayan. So, anong unang balita natin? O, hangin pa rin, no? Hangin din, hanapin ko rin balitang hangin. Ayan. Okay, magandang umaga sa inyo. Good morning sa mga naniwala po sa programa natin, no? Okay, yung hindi bumitaw sa atin mga kababayan. Okay, kahit ano pang mangyari, okay, tuloy-tuloy po ang programa mga suki, no? Okay,
Mahigit na isang dekada,
saan na yun? Hanapin po natin ang balitang hangin, no? Okay, sandali lang. Okay, pakinggan natin po si Benison Estareja, no? Okay, tama ba ko Estareja? O, okay, ang weather update at 8 po ng Oktober 2024. Pinabas nila kanina po alas 4.
Happy Friday po sa ating lahat. Ako si Benison Estareja. Patuloy pa rin pong epekto ng dalawang weather systems sa ating bansa. Una na dyan ay ang mga paulan po dito sa parting Mindanao at Palawan dahil pa rin yan sa Intertropical Convergence Zone or ITCZ na siyang tagpuan po ng hangin from the northern and southern hemispheres. Habang patuloy din ang epekto ng easterlies o yung hangin galing sa Pacific Ocean na siyang nagdadala ng mataas na tsansa ng ulan sa may silangang parte ng Luzon. Samantalang isang low pressure area pong nabuo sa may Pacific Ocean sa silangan po ng Visayas. As of 3 in the morning ay nasa higit 2,000 kilometers ito east of eastern Visayas at within the next 24 hours, hindi naman ito inaasahang papasok ng ating Philippine Area of Responsibility. Wala pang inaasahang epekto at hindi pa rin inaasahan na magiging isang bagyo sa susunod po na 24 oras. Along this ITCZ, meron din possible na mga panibagong circulation na mabubuo kaya lagi po tayo magkatabay sa ating mga updates. For today, asahan pa rin ang epekto ng easterly sa malaking bahagi po ng Luzon. Magdadala ito ng bahagyang maulap hanggang maulap na kalangitan sa may Cagayan Valley, Aurora, Quezon, and Bicol Region na sinasamahan din ng mga pulong-pulong mga paulan or pagtid at pagkulog, lalo na po sa tanghali hanggang sa hapon. Sa natita ng bahagi ng Luzon, kabilang ang Metro Manila, andyan pa rin ang minsang maaraw na umaga hanggang tanghali. Medyo mag-init na tanghali at sa dakong hapon hanggang sa gabi. Minsan kumukulim na rin po at aasahan din po yung mga pulong-pulong ulan at mga pagtid at pagkulog na nagtatagal lamang po ng 1 hanggang 2 oras. Temperature natin sa Metro Manila, posibleng mainit na hanggang 33 degrees Celsius, habang sa Baguio naman 17 hanggang 25 degrees Celsius. Sa ating mga kababayan po sa may southern portion ng Palawan, asahan pa rin po ang maulang panahon dahil sa Intertropical Convergence Zone, habang ang mainland or central and northern portions ng Palawan, asahan pa rin ang bahagyang maulap at madalas maaraw na umaga hanggang tanghali at may pulong-pulong ulan sa hapon at gabi. Sa malaking bahagi ng Visayas, asahan ng bahagyang maulap at minsan maulap din na kalangitan umaga pa lamang. May mga areas na maulan kagaya sa may Panay Island at sa may Eastern Visayas na pagsapit po ng hapon hanggang sa gabi. Mas marami lugar sa Visayas na magkakaroon ng mga pulong-pulong ulan o epekto na rin po ng intertropical. Temperature natin sa malaking bahagi ng Visayas and Palawan, posible pa rin hanggang 32 degrees Celsius. At sa ating mga kababayan po sa may southern portions, magdala pa rin po ng payong dito sa Mindanao dahil po sa epekto ng ITCZ, asahan ng mataas na tsansa ng ulan sa Zamboanga Peninsula, Bangsamoro Region, Socsagen at maging dito rin po sa mga probinsya ng Davao del Sur, Davao Oriental, and Davao Occidental. Hindi tuloy-tuloy yung mga pagulan pero minsan po ay malalakas kaya mag-ingat pa rin sa banta ng baha at pagbuho ng lupa. Sa natitirang bahagi ng Mindanao, Tadras of Davao Region, Northern Mindanao, Caraga Region, bahagyang maulap hanggang maulap ang kalangitan na sinasamahan pa rin po ng mga isolated na ulan lalo sa dakong hapon hanggang sa gabi. Temperature natin sa malaking bahagi ng Mindanao mula 25 at posibleng hanggang 32 degrees Celsius. Ngayong araw at bukas, wala pa rin tayong aasahang gale warning or babala sa matataas ng mga pag-alon. Banayan na katamtaman hanggang katamtaman na taas sa mga pag-alon po in many seaports of our country hanggang 2 metro kapag mayroong mga thunderstorms. Then over the weekend, lalo na po sa Sunday onwards, ay possible na maging maalon na sa may Northern Luzon at sa may silangang baybay din po ng Central and Southern Luzon dahil sa paglakas po ng hangin galing sa hilagang silangan. At sa susunod pa na 3 araw, asahan po mga paulan sa malaking bahagi po ng ating bansa. Tulad ng nabanggit natin kanina, along the ITCZ, may possible pa na mabuo na isang
A major.
back-low pressure area at dito
A
po
flat
sa
major.
ng ating Philippine
B
area of
major.
responsibility over this weekend. At hindi rin natin inaalis yung chance na early next week ay maging isang bagyo ito no, pagpasok ng ating part. Samantala, yung ating ITCZ, simula po sa Sabado hanggang sa Lunes, magpapulan pa rin sa malaking bahagi ng Mindanao at Palawan. Kaya mag-ingat po sa banta ng baha at landslides at laging tumutok sa ating mga updates, heavy rainfall warnings, and even mga rainfall advisories. Dito naman sa may Cagayan Valley, silangang pati po ng Central and Southern Luzon, hanggang sa malaking bahagi ng Visayas, magiging maulan din po dahil sa epekto ng trough ng low pressure area, plus yung shear line yung tagpuan po ng easterlies at ng northeast wind flow. Kaya lagi din po magandabay at mag-ingat sa mga banta ng baha at pagbuo ng lupa. Sunrise po natin ay 5:48 a.m. Sunset ay 5:34 p.m. Yan muna ang latest mula dito sa weather forecasting ng Pag-asa. Ako muli si Benison Estareja. Mag-ingat po tayo.
Okay, Benison, yan.
Female voice, male voice, lolly voice, monster voice.
Ang programang Special Opinion Balita at iba pa ay tumatalakay sa mga isyu pang kasalukuyan at napapanahon. Mapapolitika, mapapinyon, mapakomentaryo at balita, ang programa ito ay patas sa lahat. Walang kinikilingan, walang kinakampihan, at walang pinapanigan ang programa ito. Ang programa ito ay public service sa kahanginan at trabaho lamang.
Okay, aral po sa mga mag-aalaga sa hospital, no? Halimbawa kami magkasakit, ito po aral na malaki, no? Warning, sensitive content, no? Yung nalabas po ng Inquirer.net, no? Okay, ang sabi rito, isang babae po, nurse, a female nurse was stabbed to death by a patient in a private hospital in Tagbilaran City. Okay, sabi po rito, ang patient po kill nurse in Bohol private hospital. Ayon po sa investigation, based on the investigation, okay, Marlito, okay, Cardenas, ulitin ko, no? Carlito Cardenas, linguist, okay, 31 years old, a resident of Barangay Magsaysay in Sevilla, okay, town, did not like, okay, how the 51 years old nurse, okay, treated him. Hindi po nagustuhan po ng itong tao ito pag-treat sa kanya ng isang nurse, no? Okay, dyan po sa Bohol Private Hospital. Kaya nga, warning, okay, yung mga mag-care sa atin sa mga hospital, baka hindi nyo alam, baka maulit mga ganito. Okay, huwag nyo gagawin po na sa mga pasyente, no? Once na pumasok dyan, alagaan ng mabuti kasi may sakit mga kababayan, no? Ako ngayon gusto pumasok sa hospital. Pero tingnan na lang natin kung ano ito mga kababayan, no? So, malaking aral, no? Sa Bohol na area, Bohol Province, yan po, 51 years old po, inunda yan po ng saksak ng pasyente. Okay, patay. Okay, hindi po nagustuhan niya ang serbisyo, okay, para sa kanya itong pasyente, no? Okay. So, ganun po mga kababayan, minsan ng insidente, okay, kahit saan po mga kababayan, no? So, ingat. Okay, mga nurse natin, mga aid attendant, okay, sa mga hospital, ingat kayo sa pag-alaga po ng mga pasyente. Okay, magkataon po na mainit ang ulo, kailangan serbisyo ng mabuti. Dapat ito investigahan, no, kung ano talaga ang motive. Okay, kung ano talaga ang totoo. Okay, investigahan po ng mga Department of Health, no? Okay, at saka itong mga authority. PNP ay alamin kung bakit ginawa po ng pasyente yon. Malaking aral eh. Okay, malaking aral po. Bakit po hantong ng ganon? Okay, sinaksak niya ang nurse. Okay, sa kanyang pagtrato. Okay, sa loob ng hospital, no? Okay, human interest ito, no? Ayan. Kauna-unahan natin nangyari ito mga kababayan, mga ganito, no? Ayan. Sige po, sandali lang. Okay, hanapin po natin ng susunod na balita. Ayan. Sige.
Ang programa ng Special Opinion Balita at iba pa ay tumatalakay sa mga isyu pang kasalukuyan at napapanahon. Mapapolitika, mapapinyon, mapakomentaryo at balita, ang programa ito ay patas sa lahat. Walang kinikilingan, walang kinakampihan, at walang pinapanigan ang programa ito. Ang programa ito ay public service sa kahanginan at trabaho lamang.
Shop to A major. A major. Ship to C major. Female voice. Male voice. Lolly voice. Monster voice.
Okay, mga kandidato po sa buong kapuluan na parehas national, regional at saka itong mga local government, no? Okay, kanya-kanyang gimmick po sa kanilang mga social media accounts, no? Okay, daming mga gimmick po ay pinalabas nila pamagitan po ng social media, no? Okay, mag-social media na po ang mga kandidato, no? Okay, sa local government, okay, and then sa mga regional, and then sa national. Okay, talagang gumagawa po ng mga gimmick, okay, ang mga politika, mga kababayan, no? Okay, para ma-recall, okay, maalala sila, okay, sa kanilang pagtakbo po sa midterm election 2025, no? Okay lang. Okay. Okay lang. Pero problema, wala tayong kita sa mga legitimate news online. Kung sila na mismo po ang gumagawa ng kanilang mga gimmick. Ayan po, no? So, mawalan na tayo ng kita. Okay, humasa lang tayo sa revenue. Okay, galing po sa kanilang mga kababayan, no? So, kanya-kanyang gimmick. Okay, sa mga basulta dito sa Zamboanga Peninsula, okay, Western Mindanao, kanya-kanya po palabas ang mga pamagitan ng Reels, TikTok, Okay, Facebook, YouTube mga kababayan, no? Okay. Parang walang gaano gumagamit po ng X, no? Okay, bihira ang X. Yan po. So, Facebook, okay, platform ng Facebook and then YouTube and then TikTok. Malakas ang TikTok, no? At saka itong Reels ng Facebook, no? Ayan. So, ang ganda mo, no? Ang gandang mga ginagawa nila. May mga kanta-kanta and then parang pasayaw-sayaw, palakad-lakad. Okay, so makita mo na si ano ganun pala, tatakbo si ganon. Madali ang recalling mga kababayan, no? So, yan po ang uso ngayon. Okay, pagalingan po ng TikTok, pagalingan ng Facebook, pagalingan ng YouTube, pagalingan po ng Reels ang uso po ngayon, no? Tayo magpauso noon ng matagal na panahon, nauna pa po sa Facebook. Okay, wala na, nagawan na tayo po mga kababayan ng mga susunod na generation, magagaling sa mga TikTok. Okay, dahil po sa platform po ng kanilang social media, no? Ayan. So, yan po ang naobserbahan natin po kasalukuyan, no? Sige lang. Ayan. Sige lang.
Ang programa ng Special Opinion Balita at Iba ay tumatalakay sa mga isyu pang kasalukuyan at napapanahon. Mapapolitika, mapapinyon, mapakomentaryo at balita, ang programa ito ay patas sa lahat. Walang kinikilingan, walang kinakampihan, at walang pinapanigan ang programa ito. Ang programa ito ay public service sa kahanginan at trabaho lamang.
Okay, ano itong okay, media lies, pure genocide po mga sukin, no? Learning nating US 1, New Middle East mga sukin. Pakinggan natin ito, no? Okay, magsunungaling daw yung mga mag-cover po ng media. Kaya nagkaroon po ng genocide mga kababayan, no? Pakinggan na natin kung kaninong favor ang tao ito mga kababayan, no? At least alam natin. Sige.
You've probably never seen these lifelong presbyopic glasses that can be worn no matter what your prescription is. They can intelligently zoom, making both near and...
We need a new system. We need a new society. We need to demand that which may have sounded impossible even a few weeks ago, but is not only realizable, but an imperative necessity.
Wag sunungaling daw media, no?
Western capitalist media, also known as the mainstream media, is deliberately misleading people about the U.S.-Israeli aggression against the people of Gaza, the people of the West Bank, the people of Lebanon, and about the danger of a wider regional war in the Middle East, including Iran. Welcome to this week's episode of the Socialist Program. I'm your host, Brian Becker. Today we're talking with journalist and author Vijay Prashad. Vijay is the executive director of the Tricontinental Institute for Social Research. He's the chief editor of Leftward Books, and he is a prolific author, most recently publishing a new book with Noam Chomsky called On Cuba, Reflections of 70 Years of Revolution and Struggle. Vijay Prashad, welcome back.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Brian. Thanks. Nice to be with you.
Great to have you. BJ, we have a lot to cover. We're going to talk about the Middle East war. We're going to talk about, as I mentioned in the intro, the lying media, the capitalist media, the so-called mainstream media. I want to talk about the danger of a regional war. You're following the danger very closely. You've been to the Middle East frequently. You know what's going on. But then, as we go on, I also want to talk to you about the Ukraine war, about the U.S. military buildup against China. There's a lot to talk about here. But let's get started with the capitalist media, the so-called mainstream media. The New York Times, a famous
Female voice,
cliche, the
male
slogan,
voice,
all the
Lolly
news that's
voice.
fit to
Monster
print.
voice.
Well, I was looking at headlines in the New York Times. They're really amazing, BJ. One stated, it was changed shortly thereafter, but it starts with these words. Israel
Oh, wag kayo alis, no? Yung trabaho ba ng
Israel
media?
carries out major
Wag
bombing
kayo alis.
of Hezbollah
Okay,
stronghold in Lebanon.
pahinga-hinga muna ako sandali.
Hezbollah stronghold. There's another way they could have worded that, which is Israel bombs a major, densely packed urban neighborhood in the southern part of Beirut, and hundreds of civilians were killed. But when you have the headline saying it's a major Hezbollah stronghold, the reader, maybe those who don't read this story, and that perhaps is most people who see a headline, they come to the conclusion that Israel has just hit and killed Hezbollah fighters. Anyway, this is so important because the narrative shapes people's consciousness. If it was a state-owned media, let's say we were reading a story from the old Soviet Union, people would say, oh, Pravda, well, that's what the Soviet government wants us to think because it's a state-owned media. The New York Times isn't state-owned, it's private. It's the free press. And thus you get the idea, the wrong idea, that it's somehow independent of the U.S. government. Anyway, let's get started.
Yeah, I mean, it's a travesty that has been there for now decades. This phraseology that, defines how the media such as the New York Times, but also BBC, the German media, Bild, and others covers the Middle East. Beirut has for a very long time been euphemistically called a Hezbollah stronghold, particularly the south of Beirut. This, use of the term Hezbollah stronghold almost gives license to either Israel or in some earlier instances the United States to directly bomb this part of Beirut. I'm going to come back to what this part of Beirut is, but I want to bring into the conversation, Brian, something that the German foreign minister Anneli Baerbock said in the Bundestag, in German parliament. She was talking about Gaza, but this is the same point. She said that, and this is in the German parliament, mind you, she said that if Hamas takes civilians and uses them as shields, then the places where Hamas is using...
Okay. If you are not changing the course of to coverage like us, independent news, okay, it's very sure that the credibility of Western media will be destroyed. 100% will be destroyed, no? Because of our manipulation of news, which is not true, which is lies. So if you are not changing our strategy, okay, Western media will be destroyed, 100%. Okay, no one would believe us if you are not balanced to report to the world a balanced and a just media. Sira tayo. Okay, sira ang Western media, mga kababayan, no? Okay. And then maraming mga magsulputan bagong media, tapos magbalita na talagang ay balita ng totoo, mga kababayan, no? Okay, so it need to change our course, especially Western media, no? If we are not changing our course, 100% will be destroyed. Nobody will believe us. Ayan po, mga kababayan, no? Ang problema yung mga capitalist media, yung mga mayayaman, okay, siyempre, favor po sa kanilang interest. Kaya nagkasira-sira pang Western media, no? Okay, good analysis. Ayan.
Civilian shields is now a military target. In other words, there is no immunity for civilians. Civilians lose their immunity if they're in the proximity of Hamas. This is, by the way, not in accordance with international law. There is no international law that permits combatants to fire on...
Okay, Western media is fond of lying. Okay, I'm sorry to say that. we are fond of lying. Okay, created an animosity of manipulation toward our report, no? Ayan. Mahilig tayo mag-manipulate ng balita. Daming mag-practice ng ganun mga suki, no? Hindi LDSN TV News Online, no? Hindi po ginagawa ng LDSN TV News Online. Kung ano lang balita, kung anong truth balita, yon lang pinalabas natin, no? Okay. So, meron analysis itong galing sa tao ito, pakinggan natin, no? Okay. Western media no more. Ayan.
Civilian areas if they believe there are other combatants there. That is actually against international law. In the German parliament, the German foreign minister has basically provided the Israelis a justification to go out there and bomb Gaza even more. And by the way, the safe areas of Gaza, Brian, are now with a density of population of 35,000 people per square kilometer. Just for comparison, in the United States, the density of population is 35 per square kilometer. Obviously, this is uneven. New York City is more congested than, say, the plains of Texas or Oklahoma. But even New York City is nowhere near a density of...
Okay, Western media has no credibility right now, no? Okay. Talagang destroyed po ang Western media. Okay, sa pananaw po ng mga makikinig sa news, mahilig sa news, wala. Galit ang tao po sa mga report nila. Ayan. Sige. Okay, go ahead.
Population 35,000 people a square kilometer. It's way under the thousands, way under. So when Annalie Baerbock and people like that and the New York Times talk about, let's say, a Hamas, whatever strategic area or a Hezbollah stronghold, they are basically violating international law by permitting the Israeli government to bomb areas where the density of population is extremely high, and therefore the civilian casualties will be very high. If you look carefully at the kind of explosives used, whether it's the 2,000-pound bomb or the 500-pound bomb, there is no way, despite claims about precision bombing, and it's true, bombs today are more precise than they were 100 years ago, but there is no way to drop a 2,000-pound bomb on a building in Beirut and not kill immediately thousands of people. There is no way. The bombing against Syed Hassan Nasrallah, they used 80 bombs of different weights, but a number of them being 2,000-pound bombs. We don't even yet know how many civilians died there, because the crater that was created in a smaller scale resembles the bomb dropped by the US government in a province bordering Pakistan and Afghanistan called the mother of all bombs. So,
okay, katulad lang dito sa Pilipinas, no? Nung bago si PBBM, okay, namigay po sa mga Malacanang press corps ng mga laptop. So tumanggap po lahat ng laptop itong yung mga sa Malacanang press corps, no? Issue yun noon eh. Okay. So, ibig sabihin kailangan pabor ka sa kung ano ang balita sa loob ng Malacanang. Okay, pabor ka. Dahil bigyan ka ng laptop at saka ano ba yan? Yung iPhone na yung iPhone ba? Yung mahal na iPhone. So, isa yan sa mga hindi po maganda mga kababayan, na. Okay, isa sa mga hindi maganda. Okay, sa practice natin ng journalism mga kababayan, na. Yung magtanggap ka ba ng magtanggap ka ng pabuya. Okay, grease money. Okay, hindi ka makabalita ng mabuti. Kasi may utang na loob ka na. Ayan. Okay, may utang na loob ka na sa mga kliyente mo, no? Okay. Pangit. Ayan po mga suki, no? Ayan. Sige.
this usage of the term, Hezbollah stronghold, Hamas command and control center, Taliban stronghold, this has been with us for a long time. It is itself a violation of international law. The New York Times should not be using phrases like that if it has any decency. I mean, what they should actually write is, the Israelis bombed Beirut. That is actually what they should be saying, not a Hezbollah stronghold. Beirut is not a Hezbollah stronghold. Hezbollah is a major political party in Lebanon with members of parliament in the Lebanese parliament. To call them just a combatant organization is ridiculous. People that died were in the political wing of Hezbollah. They don't have any relationship to the armed section of Hezbollah. So this idea of Hezbollah stronghold, or indeed Hamas stronghold and so on, is very dangerous, and it in itself, in my opinion, provides license to the Israelis. But there's nothing worse than having the foreign minister of a European country make the same kind of argument in a parliament. That was actually quite shocking to me. I've been inured to watching the press make all kinds of ridiculous statements, but having a foreign minister of a government in Europe say that in the parliament was shocking, and I'm not so easily shocked any longer.
Nakakagulat ang 8 metrong buhok ng 2 anak na babae. Ang dahilan ay dahil sa labis na paggamit ng ina. Kaya mga homies, kung sakaling gumagamit kayo ng easy na shampoo para sa pagtubo ng buhok, huwag niyong ipagamit sa mga anak niyo. Dahil ang produkto
Mahaba kasi, ano na lang natin, no? Sige. Ano topic niya?
Shocking, and I'm not so easily shocked any longer.
Yeah, and again, just for people watching this show or listening to the show, think about it. If a foreign country came and dropped big bombs, 2,000-pound bombs, 1,800-pound bombs, that's what the Israelis are dropping on these neighborhoods. That's what they, as you wrote and talked about, the Israelis dropped 80 bombs, including 2,000-pound bombs, on one block where 6 buildings were flattened in order to kill Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah. Just think if somebody did that, a foreign country did that, say, where I am in Midtown Manhattan, and then somebody would say, so-and-so, such-and-such country bombed a Democratic Party stronghold in the United States because New York is dominated by the Democrats. Or let's say somebody bombed Alabama and Mississippi or Florida and said a Republican Party stronghold was bombed. Like, nobody would accept that as like journalism. That's just straight out apologist propaganda for the bombers. And again, the Geneva Convention and other international law, VJ, is quite clear on it. I mean, you can't get clearer. It says to belligerents in armed conflict that if there are civilians who could be killed as you're attacking enemy combatants, in other words, if they are close enough to the enemy combatants that you want to kill, you can't strike. I mean, that's the Geneva Convention. And all of the countries that are signers to the Geneva Convention, again, it's routinely violated, but it's important to point out that the U.S. government knows about the Geneva Convention. The New York Times knows about it. I'm sure if Hezbollah or Hamas or Iran did the same thing and used the same language, they would say, no, that's a war crime. They certainly, freely use the terminology of war crimes or war criminals, say, against Milosevic in Yugoslavia when, after the U.S. dropped 28,000 bombs and missiles on Yugoslavia in 1999, and then took the head of state and brought him to The Hague and charged him with war crimes. So they freely talk about war crimes. It's not like they're unaware of the language of war crimes. It's just that it doesn't apply to the United States, it doesn't apply to NATO allies, and it doesn't apply to Israel. One other thing really struck me, and you highlighted this in your recent Tricontinental Research dossier, the recent one, and I want to encourage people to subscribe. But you go into this former U.S. aviator, Commander Graham Scarborough, or something like that. He talks about, the language here is amazing, VJ, because he talks about Israel, here I'm going to quote from from it for you. He says Israel seems to have a higher threshold for collateral damage, meaning they may strike even when chances are higher for civilian casualties. The Israelis have a higher threshold for civilian casualties. So what does that mean? It means like Israel is deliberately bombing civilians. And the soft, passive language, they have a higher threshold than, quote, we do, which again is not true, because if the we is the United States government, one only need look at Fallujah in Iraq or Vietnam to see about the threshold for civilian casualties. But again, it's the language which is seemingly accepted by the capitalist mainstream media because it helps them.
I mean, from my perspective, Brian, this is a very important article written by a U.S. official, a military official in a U.S. military website. It's a very important article, and let's look at some of the recent events that underline that. Look, it's true, that the United States bombed ferociously the Iraqis, illegal war in 2003. It was called shock and awe. I mean, they intentionally bombed ferociously. The bombing of Libya was ferocious, but nothing compares qualitatively to what we are seeing now. When the Nobel Peace Prize was recently given to the survivors of the atomic bomb attack, one of the survivors who himself was irradiated at the age of 3, Toshiyuki Mimaki, he said that, look, I thought that the people in Gaza would get the prize this year. That's what he said. And he said, this attack on Gaza reminds me of Japan. In fact, there are some important differences which will come to this issue of so-called collateral damage. One is that the bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. Most people around the world had no idea what the impact of that bomb would be. Just a small number of scientists, technicians, and people in the US government and military knew about it. But we didn't know it was going to happen. And we didn't know that a second bomb was going to be dropped on Nagasaki. But in this case, the bombing has been titrated. It's not one giant nuclear bomb. It's been titrated over the course of a year. So we've been watching the civilian casualties add up. We're watching the so-called collateral damage. That's different from Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It's an important difference. We know what's coming tomorrow. In fact, we are in the month of October. Already 3 schools which are, have become shelters in Gaza. 3 schools were struck in the course of just a few days. And I think this is important for people to understand, because this is in the Deir el-Balan neighborhood of Gaza. The 3 schools that were struck were the Ahmad al-Kurd school, hit on October the 5th, Al-Aisha school, hit on October the 3rd, and then Rufaida al-Islamia secondary school for girls, hit on October 10th. Few days later, there was...
Okay, magandang topic, no? Okay, break muna natin.
Ang programang Special Opinion Balita at iba pa ay tumatalakay sa mga isyu pang kasalukuyan at napapanahon. Mapapolitika, mapapinyon, mapakomentaryo at balita. Ang programa ito ay patas sa lahat. Walang kinikilingan, walang kinakampihan, at walang pinapanigan ang programa ito. Ang programa ito ay public service sa kahanginan at trabaho lamang.
Yan po ang danger po trabaho ng media. No? Trabaho namin, very dangerous. Okay, kung mga media loko-loko, okay, very dangerous ang trabaho namin, no? Ayan. Pero yung mga matitino media ay hindi po. Okay.
The bombing of the tents right next to the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Hospital, where the young man there was this terrible video of a young man on fire with his hand up. He had his hand attached to an IV drip. A young 19-year-old man, Shaban, who was a guitarist, did very well in his exams, and so on. This bombing of the Deir el-Balan neighborhood in Gaza was very clearly an attack on civilians. There was no understanding that there's any Hamas there. In fact, when they bombed the girls' secondary school on October 10th, the Israelis made a public declaration saying, we hate Hamas. The 28 names that were released, biographies of each of the names are available. I read them through. One was, by the way, a 6-year-old child. The other was an 86-year-old woman. I doubt that they have operational capacity inside Hamas. Very much doubt it. There was a policeman killed. The administrator of the school was killed. None of these people had any affiliation to Hamas in their biographies. In fact, in an earlier bombardment where 30-some civilians were killed, I again looked at each of the biographies of the people. I contacted local journalists, talked to people who are in the area, and several of the people who had been killed in that Israeli attack a couple of months ago were in fact publicly opposed to Hamas. They had a different political orientation. This didn't seem to matter to the media. I mean, you remember when the New York Times ran those biographies of people who had died in 9/11. You know, very interesting biographies of the people. I would like to suggest that a newspaper such as the New York Times takes the time, makes an effort. One attack. Let's take the Rufaida al-Islamiyah school attack of October 10th. I will supply the New York Times journalists the names of the people. I will even help them get in touch with people on the ground. Great reporters that are there. Imad Zakut, for instance, a very good reporter on the ground. I'll get them in touch with people, with Abu Bakr Abed. Let Abu Bakr Abed go and show them who these people were. And wouldn't it be a challenge for the New York Times to print a page of its paper on the 28 people killed at this one school and their biographies, to dispel the myth that these people are all with Hamas? Because this idea that all Palestinians are Hamas, or all Lebanese, or at least Lebanese who are Shia are Hezbollah, is a deeply worrying trend that is normalizing violence and allowing
Female
the
voice,
civilian casualties
male
to be
voice,
set aside.
lolly
So,
voice,
you know,
monster
I would like
voice.
to just give them a challenge publicly, Brian, and say that if the New York Times is interested, please get in touch with me.
Pwede yung voice effects or voice lang.
Thank you. Zadi pala, ha?
Okay.
Very good. I hope they take you up, VJ, on your offer. Again, let's talk about language and its importance. I want to just stay with the subject because, you know, as Marx said, and I've quoted frequently on this show, Marx made the point that the ideas of any society are the ideas of its ruling class until such time when they no longer are the ideas of society, and then there's revolution. But in the meantime, or before that, prior to that, the ruling class dominates the narrative, or ruling class elites. And they have different factions and tendencies. It's not like a monolith. The ruling class is not a group of people who sit in a boardroom in Wall Street and make decisions. There are factions, there are tendencies, there are contradictions, but they all agree on some things. And in this case, in the case of the United States, and unlike, say, the Vietnam War, where there was a sharp division within the ruling class over whether the war should be continued or ended once they realized they couldn't defeat the Vietnamese, then there was like a debate in the U.S. media over whether the war should continue. Walter Cronkite told the American people after the Tet Offensive, there is no light at the end of this tunnel. And the media sort of became the mouthpiece of a fight within the ruling class about whether the war should continue. In the case of the Middle East, there's unity right now in the ruling class about Israel. So the language is the people who oppose Israeli aggression or Israeli occupation or Israeli apartheid, the people who take up arms against it, they are terrorists. Their neighbors who defend their country against Israeli aggression, they are terrorists. But if Israel kills 41,000 people in a densely packed area, the most densely packed area in the world, Gaza's only 5 miles wide, 25 miles long, that's not terrorism. There's been no usage of the term terrorist to define the Israeli war. Now let's go back. Let's roll the video back. Let's go to South Africa. In the mid-1980s, or sort of towards the end of the 1980s, I think it was 1988, the U.S. House of Representatives had a vote of whether the terrorist designation of Nelson Mandela and the African National Congress should be ended, because the U.S. designated the ANC, as they designate the Palestinian resistance group, as a terrorist organization. Why? Because the U.S. was then supporting South Africa until there became a division within the U.S. ruling class over whether that was a wise policy. That division was caused, as it was in Vietnam, by mass protest, a global movement of opposition, but eventually a section of the ruling class said, no, this policy of supporting apartheid is a bad idea. Let's move to a new policy. Let's free Nelson Mandela. And so Congress finally voted in 1988 to say Nelson Mandela is not a terrorist. But up until then, he was a terrorist. So to the people of South Africa, he was always a freedom fighter. He was an opponent of apartheid. He was a hero. But in America, he was a terrorist. Again, I think it's really important, this designation and the usage of the language terrorism to demonize those who are fighting against colonization. If the American Revolution was the American War of Independence was taking place right now, King George, who also used colorful, demonizing language against George Washington, would definitely call him a terrorist. Anyway, let's talk a little bit more about this.
You know, it's interesting, the paper cracked a little bit after the pager attack against the people of Lebanon conducted by Israeli intelligence. Remember, there were a bunch of pagers delivered into Lebanon. These pagers then exploded. There was a great deal of panic inside Lebanon before the bombings began, that, you know, radios would explode, or the devices that parents use to listen to their children in a different room, those might explode and so on. When all of this was taking place, ex-CIA director and Defense Secretary Leon Panetta came out and said, well, it's no doubt that this is an act of terrorism. But it's very interesting what he said. And I think it bears, repeating his argument. Firstly, he did acknowledge that the Israelis conducted an act of terrorism. But then he said, what's dangerous is that now this form of terrorism is up and down the supply chain. In other words, other people might use this because it is in fact a low intensity form of creating panic in a society. If you get 20 pagers or in another country, let's say, mobile phones to start exploding in people's pockets, it just creates an overall sense of panic. And that, after all, is part of the goals of terrorism. Mr. Panetta made these comments, ex-CIA, ex-Defense Secretary, worrying more about the implications of having opened the Pandora's box on, letting small electronic devices explode, very badly damage people, injure people, and so on. But he did say it's an act of terrorism. And it's interesting, that sort of disappeared after maybe a day or so in the news cycle, because it's just apparently unconscionable to believe that Israel is acting in a terrorist manner. You may remember, Brian, some years ago, Noam Chomsky gave a very interesting interview where he said the United States is the greatest terrorist force on the planet Earth. That statement was not reported anywhere. It's a pretty interesting statement because Chomsky is a linguist. He's very careful with his language. He's not, somebody who likes to exaggerate with language. And he said very precisely, look, the United States spreads terror around the world. One of the forms of spreading terror is by providing weaponry to various forces that destabilize the world. This bombing that has been taking place in Gaza and in Lebanon is armed fully by the United States. And therefore, if this is sowing terror in Gaza, if a population that cannot defend itself against the dropping of a 2,000-pound bomb, has to just live with the experience of that, it's a form of terrorism. The United States, therefore, is a participant in this act of terror because they are refusing to stop providing the weapons. Very interesting. The New York Times and Washington Post both covered this. You see, when the U.S. makes a large weapons delivery, there has to be a discussion in the U.S. Congress. I mean, there's arms control issues involved, there's foreign policy implications and so on. So there are oversight committees in the U.S. Congress that are supposed to look into these things. But in order to give the president or the executive some threshold, they have a barrier. If you provide less than so many arms, you don't have to make a declaration to Congress. You can just, with executive order, provide weapons. So what the Biden administration has been doing, or shall I say the Biden-Harris administration, is during the course of this year, they've done a number of arms deliveries to Israel that come below the threshold. And since they're below the threshold, they're administrative deliveries of arms. They don't have any congressional oversight. There's no political discussion, and therefore there's been very little media debate and discussion. Even though when you add it all up, it's tens of billions of dollars worth of lethal equipment that the United States has provided to Israel. And I earlier quoted from the German foreign minister. The United States provides about 80% of Israel's imported weaponry. The Germans provide almost 20% of the imported equipment and bombs and so on that the Israelis are using. Between Germany and the United States, you've got it covered. There's a little bit from the United Kingdom and so on, but those are small numbers. Italy, 65% of the population, Brian, is against arms delivery to Israel. In Germany, the number is rising. It's about 33% or so against arms delivery to Israel. And we've seen this now move from a political kind of debate and concern, because people are going around the media and learning about these things in their own way, to an electoral issue. In Germany, for instance, the ruling traffic light coalition of the Free Democrats, the Greens, and the Social Democrats have been losing in all the provincial elections, and the game has been not just the far right, but the new left. The Sarah Wagenknecht, for instance, made in its first electoral outing in Saxony and Thuringia, got about 15% of the vote. That is extraordinary. They've taken a firm position against both the war in Ukraine and in Palestine. And recently in Belgium, the Belgian Workers' Party, very strong position against the genocide of the Palestinians. In many cities, in Antwerp, second largest city in Belgium, got over 20% of the vote. It's important to point out that the Belgian Workers' Party would have got more of the vote had the government, out of fear, not cancelled compulsory voting. When they cancelled compulsory voting, 40% of the population didn't come out to vote. And when there's no compulsory voting, it's often the working class and the youth that don't come out in as large numbers as the middle class. That's the natural constituency of the Workers' Party. They would have had a better showing than over 20%, which itself is double their gains in 2018. In France, the alliance of the left, in fact, has the biggest bloc in parliament. They are against the genocide taking place in Gaza. So even in Europe, you're seeing a real shift of public opinion, which I think is also being mirrored, slower, but being mirrored in the United States.
And that's not unimportant. In contemporary world public and contemporary politics, world public opinion actually matters. It may not matter instantly. A lot of people get frustrated, even when we have mass demonstrations in the U.S. of 500,000 and then hundreds of thousands and then 500,000 again, and daily demonstrations and encampments, and the bombing doesn't stop. Some people say, oh, look, it doesn't matter, these demonstrations don't work. Well, no, they don't work immediately, Nobody thought you have one demonstration and the imperialists are going to say, oh, we've rethought our position and now we're going to stop. No, that's not how it works. But public opinion and consciousness of the masses of people matters. It might not have mattered in 16th century Europe, but it does matter now. It does matter in contemporary world politics. I want to stay with this issue of the of the American arms shipments to Israel, because they're so important. And again, I'm going back to your dossier, and I want to keep encouraging people. Subscribe to Tricontinental Research for your excellent writing, and it's not just you. There's a team of researchers and analysts and journalists who are providing material. If you don't like the capitalist media, subscribe to Tricontinental Research, because you need information and you're not going to get it from the New York Times. But I want to read from the dossier, from your recent dossier. We're surging, this is quoting an American official, we're surging additional military assistance, which has amounted to a record level of $17.9 billion during the past year. Now, that's taken from the bourgeois media, from the capitalist media. $17.9 billion. I want people to think about this, because you also say that there have been 100 separate foreign military sales to Israel during the last year, and thousands of precision-guided munitions, small diameter bombs, bunker busters, small arms, and other lethal aid. $17.9 billion. Normally the U.S. gives to Israel $3 to $5 billion a year. It's the largest recipient of U.S. foreign aid and military aid. So in a way, people should think of Israel as an appendage or an extension of American military and economic power, because take that aid away. Take that $3 to $5 billion away each year. Take the $17.9 billion away from the past year. No, they couldn't be dropping bombs on tent cities as they did in the last few days, VJ, burning those people, including patients, hooked up to IV machines. They couldn't have done that. In the United States, our movement, the anti-war movement, the solidarity movement, is continuing. It's very robust. On November 2nd, there's going to be demonstrations in cities all over the country saying, no vote for genocide. Like, don't vote for the Republicans or the Democrats. Don't vote for genocide. But also, to make the point that no matter how much Biden and Harris say they want a ceasefire, no matter how much they whine about the fact that Israel is killing, quote, too many Palestinians, as if there's a right number that they have surpassed, too many civilians have been killed, Biden said, as if there's a better number of civilians who should have been killed. If the United States, if there is an arms embargo against Israel, which is what the demonstrations are now demanding in the U.S., and as you pointed out, in Germany and around the world, an arms embargo on Israel, that would mean this would stop. The arms to Israel are the key thing.
I mean, if you look at it, the United States is now, as we are speaking, saying that unless the Israelis, within 30 days, increase aid to Gaza, there will be a slowdown in military, delivery of military equipment. But this comes right after the U.S. delivers its latest tranche of equipment. There was some moderate pressure on President Biden to sanction one particular heinous battalion of the Israeli military, refused to do it. I mean, I've looked at wars for a long time like you, and it's an uncomfortable, ugly business. Soldiers do terrible things in the middle of war. There's something very strange about what we're witnessing in this war. On the one side, there is the US government constantly saying, we are trying to pressure Israel, but then pressuring them by giving them more arms. The US government saying Israeli soldiers need to behave better, but refusing to sanction any of the brigades for really terrible, heinous human rights violations. How do we know they are heinous? We know it because the soldiers have been filming it themselves and posting it on social media. Al Jazeera just ran a very good little film about basically using the soldiers' own social media posts to show these violations. In fact, naming some of the soldiers. Some of these soldiers, out of embarrassment, have removed the post. So perhaps their commanding officer said, get rid of it. But it's out there already. You know, there's a movie made of it. So we know that
Okay, haba na po mga kababayan, isang oras na. Okay. At least makakuha tayo kahit partial, no? Ayan. Sige. Okay, palagay ko hanggang dito na tayo. Okay.
Female voice, male voice, lolly voice, monster voice.
Okay, yung lumang equipment pinagsama sa bagong equipment. Mas lalo maganda. Ayan po mga suki, no? Okay, itong lumang equipment ito. Lumang equipment yan. Okay, so hanggang dito na muna ang programa kasi masama pa rin ang pakiramdam ko. Okay, hindi pa rin 100% okay. At least hindi ako na-zero sa anniversary news natin, no? Ayan. So, palagay ko hanggang dito na. Kailangan makarelax pa ako para makarecover mga suki, no? Ayan, so dito pa sa programa. Okay, consolidated news natin. Okay, sa platform po ng ADLSN TV News Online. Okay, sa programa po Halo Halo Space.